is your first time, we're just so glad you're here. We've been in this series called ETHOS, which has been an exploration of values, sacred values for a struggling world. Not only values that we as humans live, but also values that arise in community. And so today, and particularly in honor of Pride Month, we're going to be talking about the sacred value of inclusion. We are a community with a motto, love, period. I found out recently that in England, they don't say period, they say full stop. So I'm going to also say, every time that I say love, period, in order to be inclusive to the English, I'm going to say, and also love, full stop, but love, period is our, foundational ethos here in this community, and really in many ways that connects to our history and to our movement and evolution towards being an inclusive community. And as I tell this story, I just want to make it clear that this is really not my story. I've been at Aldea for about 2.5 years, and there are people that have invested in this community for 20 years, 25 or more years. And particularly, I do want to honor the Skinners, Kevin Skinner, Sylvia Skinner, who founded Aldea nearly 20 years ago and who took some really bold steps towards inclusion. There are also people here in this room today that have been alongside them on that journey for 20, 25 years. And so I just want to share that there is a lot of people who have deeply given and bled for and deeply loved and invested into this community. And really, when we talk about inclusion in a space that is a spiritual space, in something that we would call a faith community, there's a special meaning that word takes, because this is a type of space, right? As you saw from that video, this is the type of space that many people have felt excluded, right? In a church environment, in some sort of spiritual environment. And yet, whenever we take a person or a group that has been marginalized or has been othered, and we invite them into deep belonging, friends, I believe that all of us are healed, right? Not only the people being invited, but the people doing the inviting. I believe that inclusion is a sacred value because it has healing and transformative potential for everyone involved. Now, you might feel like, obviously anytime we get into any sort of subject that is sensitive, navigating it might be tricky. It's Pride Month. Sometimes Pride Month even is a little tricky. And so, I just wanted to share a little bit of my take on Pride Month, because I think obviously it is great that, companies are putting an effort to raise visibility on the LGBTQIA plus community. But I also was reflecting this week, and I was realizing that no matter what products come out in terms of Pride Month, there are just some products that I cannot in good conscience recommend. Like I found recently that Walmart has their Pride Edition ice cream. And as I love the gesture, but the amount of food coloring that it would take to produce this product, I don't know if I can, stand on stage and advise you, buy it, but I don't know if you should eat it, And then even worse, I saw these Pride Doritos, and I thought, again, it's great that you have large corporations affirming the life and vitality of our LGBTQIA plus brothers and sisters, and yet eating these products may shorten your life. I also came across, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but there were a couple years where Skittles, they said this. They said, we're, all year we're taste the rainbow. So during Pride, we're going to get rid of the rainbow because, as you can see, only one rainbow matters during Pride. But there's something about gray Skittles that make me feel like that's what you get fed like in a totalitarian regime. Or this looks like alien food. I don't know. I really wanted to get a package of gray Skittles for today's message as a prop, and so I went searching for them, and I could only find some for $75 on eBay, and so I didn't want to waste, that didn't feel like that was worthwhile, but just want you to know, yeah, gray Skittles, so chew on that. For me, this word inclusion has a very particular meaning because I come from a tradition, I come from evangelical Christianity, where in this tradition, in the mainstream version of that tradition today, there is not acceptance and belonging and inclusion extended to our LGBTQIA plus family. That to belong and include in this tradition, right, which has, including all the different variations of Christianity, has billions of participants worldwide, and yet to belong and to be included, you must fundamentally change who you are. And so when we say inclusion, we are saying that you are loved and included and belong without having to change that, without having to adjust who you love, how you show up, your gender identity. And this was a hill that Aldea was willing to die on in its founding nearly 20 years ago. And it nearly did die on that hill. And yet that choice to stand up, the choice that almost killed this community, actually is what gives us so much life today. It's such a beautiful reversal. And I say that it almost killed this community because it's always a sacrifice to take a stand for a marginalized community. And there's often this claim that I find to be really interesting. There's this claim that communities like Aldea come out in support and in full inclusion of their LGBTQIA plus brothers and sisters. And they somehow do this because it's trendy, because it's the popular decision, because it's sort of like, well, that's what culture's doing, so that's what we're going to do. And I find that to be hilarious, because there is no church or spiritual community that has ever grown from making that decision. It is always a sacrifice. I have a friend who, he was once the pastor of a large church in Seattle, and they came out in full support, affirmation, and inclusion of the LGBTQIA plus community in 2015, which led to not only massive loss of people in their community, but death threats, right? So the idea that this is something that is done because it's trendy or it's popular is just silly. And if you can find a community that grew in people or grew in finances from making that decision, if you can find that community, I will buy that bag of gray Skittles and give it to you, right? But the reason why this is such a divisive issue, and the reason why, in general, there is a sacrifice to be made, is because of the theology that surrounds the concept of being inclusive towards our LGBTQIA plus family. And when we're talking about theology, it's important to remember a couple of things. One, theology is just a word to say that it's our view of our conversations about the divine, right? How we talk about or how we frame ultimate reality. And in that, it's very important to remember that we're always talking about human concepts, right? We're talking about how we as human, fallible individuals have our ideas about the divine, something that will never be contained by human understanding. So this is always interpretive, and it's always a concept. And yet, these theologies say that belonging and acceptance requires a fundamental change of who you are, right? And there's a reason why that sort of theology actually can be a matter of life or death. Because if you are told that your God or your creator does not love you as you are, this can lead to a profound lack of self-love, as Greg just led us in, a self-acceptance, right? Living in deep fear, judging yourself, being judged by others, and even a theology that justifies acts of hate and violence. There's an author named Kevin Garcia who's a queer pastor, theologian. He wrote this book, Bad Theology Kills. And this is, the title in of itself is a quote. But he says this about that title: I'm telling you my story because not everyone has survived to tell theirs. I'm telling you my story so you can get just a glimpse of what I mean when I say bad theology kills. When I say that bad theology kills, I mean I attempted suicide twice. I mean I spent most of my life hating myself and abusing my body with drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of my self-disgust. I mean that bad theology is killing all of us. If a person is queer and they remain in a church that is not accepting of them, they are 30 to 55% more likely to commit suicide. This is Jonathan Joss. an actor who just last week was shot and killed in broad daylight in Texas as a homophobic hate crime. So the reason I share these stories is because when I say that bad theology kills, or we say that one's view of the divine and how they use God to justify othering another person, when we talk about this, it's not hyperbolic. It's not exaggerating to make a point. It's not you're trying to just simply paint this dramatic picture. No, this is real. This is real. And when we use God to justify our othering, it truly can become life or death. But there's a reason why in that quote, Kevin Garcia said that bad theology is killing all of us, right? Gay or straight. Because if I am included, but my brothers and sisters are excluded, then perhaps what I am experiencing is not true inclusion. If I am part of a system that harms anyone, perhaps it harms everyone. And so love, period, is this commitment to put human beings over theology, right? Theology, which again is always a human interpretation, right? And it's this commitment to always put human beings above that. And I believe that gay or straight, when we order and reorder our values in this way, that there is a healing that all of us experience. When we include those who are marginalized and who have been othered, that we also begin to include deep parts of ourselves that we have marginalized and othered. That you look at yourself, right? And there are parts that you have included and parts that you have conveniently excluded. And anything we do in the external mirrors the experience that we have on the inside. We all have a table of life, right? We're all setting the table constantly. And inclusion is really this question, who has a seat at your table? And think about that inside of yourself for a second, that you also have this internal table, right? All these different versions of you in which some parts belong and some parts don't, right? But can you also set the table and create belonging for all parts of yourself? It's a tall order, I know. But what might be needed? What might it look like for us to go on this journey of inclusion, not only towards those in our community, but those parts of ourselves? Well, the first thing we need is safety. Safety. Anyone who's here, who is in the mental health profession, knows how essential safety is in creating the environment for healing, right? That for any of us to experience belonging, what do we need? We need vulnerability. We need trust. But how can you expect to be vulnerable if you don't feel safe? How can you expect to trust another person if you don't feel safe in their presence? Dr. Thema Bryant, psychologist, minister, and former American Psychological Association president, she said, you cannot heal in a space that is unsafe. Safety is not a luxury, it is a necessity for wholeness. And we know this to be true, right? Like, how many of you have tried to heal in a space that didn't feel safe? Like, have you ever been ill and the doctor's bedside manner was terrible and you were like, how am I supposed to heal when I don't even feel comfortable, right? Anyone been in that situation before? My partner Olivia was in a situation like that recently. She went to get her blood drawn, and the technician was having a hard time drawing her blood. And so this technician said to Olivia, you have crappy veins. Do you think that helped, right? No, her veins shriveled up even more, And of course, poor Olivia she was so stunned, she didn't know what to say in that moment. But I have a stage, and I have a microphone. And so I just want to say to Izzy, who works at LabCorp on Wetmore, do better. But it made me think, like, imagine you were going to therapy, right? And your therapist calls you and says, okay, you have your appointment today, and I just want to let you know that my dog's going to be at this appointment as well, and my dog's only attacked 4 or 5 of my patients, which is actually really good because I have like 30 patients, so it's a good, statistically, you're probably going to be okay. How likely are you to feel like that's going to be a productive therapy session? Friends, safety is essential for healing, which is why we strive to be safe people, and we strive to create safe communities, and maybe even hardest, we strive to create a safe environment inside of our own minds and hearts, right? Because what happens when we feel judgment? Our walls come right up, and we can't heal with our walls up. Friends, healing is something that happens within you and I, and it can only happen if we let our guard down. I want to emphasize that. The healing happens inside of us. When we call someone else a healer, right, we're not saying that they have some kind of magical healing energy that they impart unto us. What we are saying is that really that person is safe, perhaps even so safe that our own healing process is encouraged and allowed. And part of feeling safe is the recognition that we would be protected and defended if push came to shove. That safety means that there is a level of protection involved. And so, to my LGBTQIA+ family here in this room, I just want to tell you, we will protect you. I will protect you. I will defend you. We have your back. And I hope that is a start at feeling the safety required to allow your full self to come through. As Brene Brown says, we cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And that can only happen when we are safe. So we need safety. And perhaps through safety, we cultivate vulnerable and powerful selves. That through safety, we allow the fullness of our self-expression to come through. So we start with safety, and this leads to deeper self-expression. Because you might be out there thinking, well, okay, I hear that I'm included, but is all of me included? Friends, we can't invite people to our tables conditionally. Right? Have you ever been invited somewhere conditionally and you're probably like, I don't think I'm going to go, right? Like imagine you were invited to a wedding. You get a wedding invitation and it's like, hey, I want to invite you to our wedding on the evening of the 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. You and a +1, just don't bring any of your stupid jokes. Like you're going to, okay, that was a dumb joke. So it was meta because it was a bad joke talking about a bad joke. So it's like somehow I win in some weird way. So anyway. We have to remember that when we are extending the invitation, that so often we can extend partial invitations, right, to partial selves. And really inclusion is about the full acceptance of each person's full expression, or as Kevin Garcia said, inclusion isn't about tolerating difference, it's about celebrating the divine in every expression of it. We come into this space, and we often talk about this perspective of God or the divine, or however you choose to name it, right? The universe, whatever feels comfortable for you. But we talk about reality, right, in such a way that it holds all and it sustains all and it is in all. One of the phrases I love is ground of being. And so in that, and at least this is how I view it, that really on some level there's nothing that we can encounter, nothing and no one that we could come across in this life that doesn't hold on some level an expression of the divine, a spark of the divine. And so can we, in every version, in every person that we meet, celebrate that expression? Or, as Ram Dass said, treat everyone you meet like God in drag. Tell that to the evangelicals trying to ban drag shows, you too are God in drag, Don't think they would like that very much. But friends, is this to say that even when we come across an expression of humanity, of being, that is perhaps different than we are used to, different than what we might have normally been comfortable with or familiar with, can we still celebrate the divine there, right? That this person too is God behind another face, right? And allowing it to do something in us. Or as Barbara Brown Taylor says, the hardest spiritual work in the world is to love the neighbor as the self. Remember that. Love the neighbor as yourself. To encounter another human being, not as someone you can use, change, fix, help, save, enroll, convince, or control, but simply as someone, catch this, who can spring you into spiritual reverence. That we encounter every expression as a gift. Yet what so often happens in our culture, particularly our religious cultures, we put up boundaries and walls to create an illusion of safety and protection from that which is different or that which is other. But I would just challenge not only all of us, but really anyone out in the world who lives in that kind of community and environment. I would challenge this. If your perceived safety requires others to be unsafe, then perhaps it is not true safety. I would question that, right? If your belonging in some sort of community requires someone else to be on the outside so that you can be on the inside, then maybe that is a type of belonging that is worth rethinking and evolving. And so what happens? We start with safety, right? And then we create as much space as possible for the full self-expression of others. And perhaps at this point, what we are doing is striving for unconditional love, an attempt at unconditional love. Now, talking about unconditional love is tricky because I think that we experience it in layers, right? That we experience moments of unconditional love, but I sometimes wonder how much we are able to fully and completely and perpetually embody unconditional love because we are human beings and human love has some flaws to it. But unconditional love can still be something that we point ourselves to and something that we strive for, where we can leave behind any conditions, any sense of, well, you will be loved and I will love you if fill in the blank. This is the very point of that motto I keep saying, love, period. Because love, period, was established to stand in contrast to a type of love that says, love, comma, if you can behave this way, if you are similar to us, if you are pleasing to me in this particular way. We're so used to love with conditions that it's almost so hard to imagine. It feels so beyond our reality to start to conceive of a love without conditions. And that's certainly not our fault. Many of us were taught, in fact, all of us were taught on some level, conditional love, right? Perhaps it began in our families. And here's the secret. Where do you think your parents were taught or conditional love, right? Their parents, right? And it just goes back to the beginning. In many ways, conditional love is all we know because it's all we've experienced. And it even is embodied in our view of God that we were handed in organized religion, right? A type of God that really, the love of God was dependent on our behavior, on so many things that we needed to do or not do in order to be pleasing to God. And yet, for many of us, right, and specifically those parents out there who have children, you start to realize, wait a second, like, do I have the capacity to be more loving than this God that I've been taught, right? Because I love my child unconditionally, and yet the God that is so often talked about in religion seems so conditional. You remember that show Are you smarter than a fifth grader? But you might not have heard of its lesser known counterpart. Are you more loving than the God of the Bible? Okay, it's not a real show. I just made it up. But honestly, here's the reality. Like, we look at some of these stories in the Bible, right? Like Abraham being asked to test his love and devotion to God by being asked to kill his own son, which at the last minute he doesn't have to do, but it was still like, hey, would you? Or you have God who does, in the form of Jesus, kill his own son to protect all his other children from his own judgment, when you're like, wait, couldn't you just have not judged them in the first place? Or you have the story of Noah, where God kills the entire world, right, except for just a select few. And you go, wait a second, like, maybe I am more loving than the God of the Bible. And really it starts to raise this existential question: do I have a greater capacity for unconditional love than this God that I've been taught about? Or has this picture of God that I've been handed, is this actually an extremely limited view of the divine? Is there something missing, right? Is this people's interpretations and cultural context and really so much of our human juxtaposing onto something that could never be contained by human understanding? Brian McLaren, he's an author, spiritual teacher. He says, why would I trust a God who is less merciful than I am? If I can imagine a more loving God than the one I've been taught, maybe that's the Spirit inviting me to grow. Friends, when we choose more inclusion, when we choose to move in the direction of love, may we trust that it's actually the Spirit, it's actually the divine, it's actually something drawing us into greater love and greater expansion and greater evolution. And perhaps what we begin to realize is that this unconditional love that we are being drawn towards and expanded into has actually been there the whole time, and we are just now waking up to it. I believe that every time that we take a step towards unconditional love, we are actually emulating reality itself, right? Think about nature for a second. Think about how unbelievably diverse nature is and how free of judgment nature is. You know, I was thinking this week and I was thinking how I just found this out that whales and hippopotami, is it hippopotami? I don't remember. I didn't search that part. We're just going to go with it. Whales and hippopotami are actually very close relatives. And I was just thinking, wow, these two vastly different animals, you're like, well, now that I look at it, I don't know. But these two vastly different animals are actually very closely related, that in the grand scheme of how diverse the animal kingdom is, that these are actually pretty close together. And you think, wow, if that's similarity, then why do I have a problem with my neighbor who I share 99.99999% of my DNA with, right? Or think about this. You and some slime mold on a tree have about 50% of the same DNA, all right? This is how diverse the animal and plant kingdom is, right? So next time someone calls you slime, just say, well, I'm only half slime, you know? Or think about space for a second. This is a picture from the James Webb Space Telescope. And space, it's in the very word, right? Like, by definition, space is room for everything to be, right? Look at all the diversity. Look at all the room that we can see in this picture. That there are light years of space for different shapes and energy and light to exist. And really, it just is just a visual of how everything belongs in this universe. So perhaps when we choose inclusion, we are simply echoing a universe in which everything already belongs, in which there is already space for all, in which variety is not just present, but it is a sign of health. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. The thing about inclusion is that inclusion goes both ways. And what I mean by this is that there might be someone here, or there might be someone in your life that is not ready to be fully on board with everything we're talking about today, that maybe has some walls that come up during these types of conversations. Maybe there's someone here today that is like, okay, I see where you're going with this, but I don't know if I'm there yet. And part of inclusion is saying that there is space for you too, that you too have a seat at the table. We remember what Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, that inclusive, good societies try to accept people as they are, even those whose acceptance of others is still evolving. We remember that Desmond Tutu was part of this massive project of healing South Africa from the divisive wounds of apartheid, working with people on vastly different levels, right? Part of this long journey of transformation. So what we can do is we can say adamantly, we will protect and we will defend our LGBTQIA plus family in our midst. We will not allow hate to exist here. And we can simultaneously say that we accept those who are still on the journey and who are still moving towards and are still evolving towards that level of acceptance. And in some ways, we're saying we trust in the transformative power of inclusion and unconditional love to do that work for us. Richard Rohr says that true inclusion doesn't just welcome the outsider, it calls everyone into deeper maturity, including those who resist it. That true inclusion and unconditional love is transformative, so transformative that we can't help but be changed in its presence. The Sufi poet Hafiz, he has this beautiful poem where he basically says that love is like a flame that burns away all that is not God. That love, it heals us, it transforms us, it leaves behind anything that is not serving us, that is not love, right? So what happens as we go on this journey? Well, maybe before you know it, love period isn't just a phrase, but it's actually a way of life. And we can look at those who are once outsiders and outcasts, and we can bring them into the fold, and perhaps then do the sometimes even harder thing, which is extend that same level of acceptance to ourselves, right? Because if I can love in such a way that says to another, you be you, right? I'm going to withhold all judgment. You be yourself. You feel safe and come alive in your full expression. If we can do that to another, then maybe we can do the thing that is sometimes even harder, which is to do that for ourselves, right? Can we remember that everything belongs, not just out there in outer space, but here in inner space? We can look at our own fear. We can look at our own ego. We can even look at what we would think of as our own nastiness. And instead of saying, get away, right, you don't belong, we can even to that part of ourselves say, I love you, I see you, I'm not going to abandon you. And we can extend that unconditional love even to ourselves so we can love our own parts into a state of healing. But what does that require if not safety, right? It all comes back to safety. So here's my encouragement for us today, friends. May we see inclusion not as something that we celebrate 1 month a year, but as a radical shift in how we see others and how we see ourselves. And really this recognition of the unconditional love of the universe itself. May we not forget that for many, this idea of inclusion and acceptance and belonging is actually life or death. May we never let that slip by us. And so may we be champions of safety, of self-expression, and unconditional love, so that all of us, right, every single one of us is transformed by the knowledge that we all belong.